Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to go?
Sure. My question was also to Professor Balmurli Natrajan, and I was wondering if you can speak a little more about, especially in the US context, the difference between race and caste, and like contextualize why it's important to push for separate legal protection of caste specifically, not just club it under racial discrimination. Thank you.
So thanks, Olivia. I think there are many others also who would be able to weigh in, and we hopefully will get them through the series, especially the folks who are present on this call and who are from the UK and who've been involved in that battle. Let me just say a couple of things, maybe as a background. I mean, when we think about the Cisco case, we need to ask questions like, what did the outing of John Doe do? I mean, why was the outing needed? Or in other words, what is the function that additional information that John Doe is Dalit do for his bosses, right? Sundar Iyer and the other folks, including Mr. Gupta. And so that's when we start thinking, so discrimination has to have both the aspects that I mentioned in it, racial discrimination as well as caste discrimination, as well as probably gender discrimination and so on. And that is, on the one hand, you differentiate or separate, and then you incorporate or hierarchize or make things unequal. Now, there have been many ways in which caste and race are seen to be comparable, seen to be at least having family resemblances. Okay? This is a term that a philosopher called Wittgenstein put forward, and there are clear ways in which there are family resemblances, especially casteism and racism, and the situation of Dalits and blacks. Now, having said that, and I've participated in that, and I've made that case also in writing, you know, that these comparables ought to be kept on the table. However, there are several other differences too that are not quite captured by putting caste under race. For example, graded hierarchy of statuses is not going to be a simple thing to get when you think of it in racial terms. Apart from the mind-boggling numbers of castes, which are more than 4,000, I mean, it's not going to be easy to explain it in terms of race. At the same time, things like, for example, in the case, if I remember right, there are, I mean, there was a mention of color, and there's a mention of national origin and a mention of religion, as well as ancestry. Now, of these, the first three are the ones in Title VII, if I remember right, and the fourth one, ancestry, is the one from the California law. To my mind, ancestry is the only thing that could definitely be made to work here, but caste is also different in terms of there's been massive ritualization of the boundaries of caste. Now, definitely, it's a given that caste has, what people are saying, has secularized over the last several years, which means the ritual identification of boundaries has decreased, and it's being enforced in other ways. But I would say endogamy is much more strict and has many more culturally meaningful layers. And these then make the use of race go only so far. It will not be able to do the job that we want it to do, which is why it may be a much better thing, but it's a much more longer term battle to seek caste on its own terms. I hope to have answered at least part of the question. Olivia.
Very good, Olivia. You have. Olivia, you are good with the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sorry. So next person is, let me see. Yeah, I would like you to ask your question to Professor Balmurli.
Cool. Thank you. So thank you for presenting about, especially talking about the definitions of caste and casteism and the structures of it. So my question is, can you also talk about the different ways caste is being practiced by the present generation who are basically immigrants from India, and how it's being perceived or passed on to the next generation, who are the kids who are basically born or even growing up here. The idea is to how do we break this normalization that we are so used to growing up. Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. I'll just make a couple of quick points and leave it to Murali to add things too from the UK experience. I think one has to begin by appreciating the situation of the next generation, kids who are born, brought up here, and especially with identity formation. So I mean, caste then is one more thing in addition to already existing ethnic or linguistic identity and religious identity, as well as class and gender identity. So caste is that extra thing. So if we think of it in that way, then we start training our own selves to start looking out for where caste creeps in. And when they are having their identities being shaped, and their desire is of having identities being shaped, because they're also in some way racialized subjects. They mean we. We all are racialized too in the places that we live in the diaspora. And in that sense, there is always some kind of a construction of identity by constructing something called tradition. And those tradition, the sources of that is where we need to be vigilant. I would start off by just submitting the following. I think the next generation is by default going to be trained quickly into a caste blind version of casteism and the culturalization of casteism. What I mean by that then is, if you look at the different sites where this cultural identity formation is taking place for the next generation, these are temples, mosques, gurudwaras, and caste associations primarily, I would say, apart from some other ways in which informal friend circles and things like that operate. And in that, there is a white gaze that is also part of it, which means that things like yoga, Ayurveda, Sanskrit and the beauty of Sanskrit, classical music and dance, and more clear ones such as Upanayanam ceremonies and vegetarianism, which includes most importantly, it's really not as much vegetarianism as much as beef eschewing, avoiding beef. And the article that I mentioned that Suraj Jacob, my colleague, and I published actually talks about 15% of India as a beef eating population, which is at least double of what the official figures indicate. But in each of these types of things, one can actually ask the question that Murali was mentioning. How is yoga talked about? How is Ayurveda talked about? Are people talking about Ayurveda as also having a very clear component of non-plant-based things, and about how Kancha Ailaya, for example, is talked about the contribution of people from working classes and oppressed castes to actually the corpus of knowledge that comes to us as Ayurveda. So there is a Brahminization, I would say, of some of these things. And that's where, if we are careful, we could actually do some good, solid groundwork and intervene, I would say. But maybe Murali can add something else and take it in a different direction.
Well, I might like to add just a couple of points. I think not radically different from what you just said. Where do caste creeps in today's younger generation, Western minds, and how do they take different forms that one feel that it is not exactly cruel, but it's part of our identity. I think one thing that has happened in the last, because of people who have stayed here a longer time, the previous generation, they have quite powerfully ethnicized caste. And I do not know about the US. If you look at the diversity and multicultural diversity representation top-down menu, when you fill any government forms or whatever in the UK, India is actually an ethnic group. It's not, India is not a nationality. It's not, a people of national origin. No, it is considered to be British Indians or Indians. So these are ethnic groups. So I think that, that ethnicization of caste, so ethnicization of that particular group identity, that needs to be, that's one area where caste actually conveniently, morphs into something else, and they all collectively come together, pretends to be, non-caste group, but actually caste. So the ethnicization of caste is one thing. And the second thing is that related to that is leveraging multiculturalism. I think that is, again, it is now, some of us are trying to undo this work, but it's an uphill task. As I said in my talk, multiculturalism is largely, it opens up to middle-class white liberals who tend to be, approaching this the non-whites in a particular manner, in a particular sympathetic manner, so that they simply listen to this dominant caste group. So what Murali talked and alluded to, the white gaze. And I've seen in many conversations with my white friends who are not particularly caste sensitive, they do not know. And they think that the vegetarianism and other practices like yoga are culture. And now the word culture actually is a little bit needs to be unpacked here. The culture here, actually, there is a romanticization of modern India, which is happening amongst the millennials, especially in the West, millennials of Indian origin or South Asian origins. So there's a romanticization of modern India in the context of ancient culture. Now that's a very interesting term. The term ancient culture very carefully filters Islam and Christianity, and by saying ancient culture, it only recognizes Sanskritic Sanatana culture. So if you actually unpack, peel a layer or two, what exactly you mean by ancient culture, but they don't even want to recognize Adivasi's culture, indigenous culture, but they would carefully repack. This is ancient culture. I'm not talking about Hinduism. I'm not talking about caste practice. I'm talking about ancient culture. So the word ancient culture, this is what I meant by articulation. So that articulation, the word ancient culture is articulated to unpack Hinduism, Hindutva ideas into that. So these are some of the ongoing practices in the West. I think one of the things that we need to highlight is that we need to constantly engage with them. I mean, easier said than done. But I also think one of the most effective ways of doing it, not only through public engagement, but also educational institution. I think there is a dire need of a critical curriculum development on this particular issue. I know that it happened in California. Balmurli was actually part of that and then movement and all that. But that is something that we should urgently look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. So Biju had a question, I think, but I don't see him now. I see Soma Ilangovan has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? And I do have some questions in the chat that I will ask after that.
Okay. Thank you all very much. It's a wonderful discussion. I really appreciate that. 25 years ago, we started Periyar International. And last year, we had an International Humanist Conference with the American Humanist Association near Washington, D.C. Many of them don't even understand what caste is. They understand race, but caste is something they cannot. You all look alike. How do you know who is from what caste? And I told them, you ask only 3 questions and you can find out the caste. And he said, what questions? He said, what's your name? What village are you from? And are you related to so and so? And that's it. Now, we have a lot of different organizations. We have to come together under some kind of an umbrella and work with the American Humans Association, and there are a lot of other organizations who are willing to work with us. And we have to discuss what are the practical steps we can take to expose this and take it all the way to the United Nations. I would like your comment on that. Thank you.
So,
Both of you.
Yeah.
I think that's what is happening is actually one small step at a time towards that. And I mean, what I find this space is much more stimulating is that we did not. I know there are friends from the UK are also here, and I would request Meena, David, and Annapurna to jump in if you want to, please. I think the UK experience is now, and we are sharing with the AKC, and I think there is definitely a swelling movement. Let us not underestimate, because of the it is true, rampant casteism is rampant and it's increasing everything. So are resistance movements. So let us not underestimate our strength. So it is happening, and there are. I think it's about time that we began engaging with each other. So my view is that it is happening, but we just have to actually be strategic about, not as I said, not just about this Cisco cost scandal, but we have longer term strategic engagement with this issue. So, but yeah, that I probably may not have answered your question, but it's just I'm just thinking that we are together here precisely because of what you just said. Yeah, thank you. And also, sorry, David asked a question. So, Balmurli, would you like to respond to that? Then I go after you.
I actually sent my response on the chat itself, but I agree with David and thanked him for bringing it up. Yes, it is transmitted across generations for the simple reason among privileged castes, there is a privilege to be transmitted. And so how that privilege gets reproduced many times can easily be done by pretending to be, or by actually being caste blind. And just like the I think Ibram Kendi said that it's not enough to be it's not enough to not be racist. You need to be anti-racist, and I think we need to have some understanding of that. But Murali, you can add on, and I do want to just say a little bit to Ilangovan sir.
I also agree with David, and I think the caste positivism or caste pride masquerading as cultural pride, it's one of the most insidious problems that we have, especially in the overseas, but also back in India. And I can say from my limited experience in London, I found that this is an interesting anecdote. I found that how Patels can actually get credit from their cash and carry shop for a longer period of time compared to others. So therefore, Patels can actually have a very quick way of actually accessing credit. And I know that caste networks in London that have a distinctive access to credits, unlike unconventional ways to access credits, and not relying on bank and so on. So yeah, absolutely yes. And I think there is a very interesting nexus, which is probably one needs to be looked at in detail. How this the privileged caste, how it holds opportunities, and how they systematically oppress the oppressed caste too. So from a very not, it's not I won't be able to substantiate in a very from a research point of view, but I know for a fact that many Sri Lankan Tamil shops, the owners are actually belong to a particular caste group, and servants belong to a certain particular caste group, and it is not accidental. So I completely agree that the caste networks, in fact, are more powerful. And in a way that in the way that they reproduce inequality, especially social and economic inequalities. I'm just I agree with David. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Balmurli, I think you can continue for Professor Somiramo.
just a couple of very quick points. One to Ilangovan's question about the UN. Well, I think there are always different options and it should be multiple front things. But I do want to point out that the very long engagement with the UN, which the most dramatic event was the Durban thing, did not quite produce any ostensible impact in India, but it produced other types of impacts. For example, it allowed for the globalization of a language across national boundaries to talk about it, so much so that people like Isabel Wilkinson here today in the New York Times and things like that are very clearly writing about a racial caste system and stuff like that. I think these are welcome impacts, but they don't end up actually materially having that easily a significant, at least, set of impacts on the lives of oppressed castes. But I want to take this question very very quickly by Varnika Arora. Is that okay, Kanaglakshmi? I think
Please go ahead.
I don't know if there are other questions too, but
next one.
Yes. So the topic of reservations is the moment one talks about caste, that is what it comes, and so we tend to actually get fully embroiled in it. I just want to say something that as long as there is casteism, there has to be some form of reservations or affirmative action. And that simple point needs to be hard-hittingly put every time. That reservation is not a form of casteism, it is a response to casteism. So reservation could stop if casteism stops. And casteism ought to stop in all of those sites, not just the workplace, but also the recruitment, not just the recruitment, but also the access to credit, and not just the access to credit, but also the sheer risk of having violation on one's body, self, property, dignity, and everything just by being Dalit. Right? The moment all that stops, yes, reservation can stop. And how to have that type of a policy? Well, I mean, we know that affirmative action in the United States is also under attack for not dissimilar reasons. But there are ways in which the question of merit itself has been unpacked completely, and who has got affirmative action and reservations for so long has also been now added to that discourse, and that's an important one. That is that upper castes have actually benefited from reservations, as have whites benefited from affirmative action for a long period of time. But I'll stop there for now.
You want to start, Sarath, and then?
Yes, thank you for these wonderful presentations. My question relates to, right now we're, in a sense, this Cisco case is coming to the fore at a very opportune time because we're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement. And in the Black Lives Matter movement, I see a lot of Indian people of Indian, young people of Indian ancestry coming to the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the features of BLM is engaging, including in our families, some very uncomfortable, what we say are uncomfortable discussions about white privilege, and it's the same thing, applying that to caste privilege. And I'm wondering whether you can comment on this as an opportunity to engage in these discussions among the younger Indians, and there's an opportunity for them to engage with their parents, because many of their parents are supportive of Black Lives Matter. I see them coming out and supporting their youth, their children. So I just want you to comment on the opportunity of this moment.
Thank you, sir. I think Balmurli and Professor Murali Do you guys have anything to say?
Yeah, I can surely just say a quick thing, Murali. Thank you, Sharat. I think you are absolutely right. I fully agree that this is an opportune moment for some form of reflexivity. That while it is easier said as well as done for children coming from somewhat progressive Indian families, and they do exist, and we need to acknowledge their presence. So the children coming out from there and having grown up, and even maybe they have gone against their parents and they're now part of the Black Lives Movement support group and even in leadership positions, it is important for them immediately to recognize the problems of caste in their own backyard. And I think that would signal a coming of age in a truly global sense of that term. And I also want to add that racialization also very much exists very, very clearly from the Indian spaces we come out of. There is a racialization of an entire population in the northeast part of India that also creeps into the very regular and frequent atrocities committed on students from African countries who are in Asia, who are in India. And then that comes into all the different ways in which a particular segment of the Indian diaspora, which has lived in Africa, has now migrated to the United States and has all kinds of nuanced ways in which racialization still continues. So it's an ongoing battle. In that sense, I totally favor the bringing together of a anti-racial perspective with an anti-caste perspective within the same set of individuals. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Murali, you have something to say?
Not much. I can only say that it's an excellent opportunity for strategic support, and we should actually garner this moment, seize this moment to, bring them to the anti-caste movement. That said, there are two other challenges that we should be aware of. One is externalizing social justice activism is often quite an easier task than actually, unlearning internal biases, unconscious biases. So this is where we go back to the point about, some of these younger people may not even be aware that they are practicing caste because they are actually thinking this is their culture. So this is where the unlearning needs to happen, number one. And also in terms of, I don't know about the US case, but in the UK, I can safely say, there are definitely progressive South Asians / Indians, and especially from dominant caste groups, and progressive and supporting BLM, all fantastic. But there is also significant amount of racism that continues to exist within Indian and South Asian community that cannot be overlooked. So while we are trying to be, try to seize the opportunity to actually bring them into our strategic, larger consolidation and solidarity, we should be mindful of what needs to happen with the rest of the community who continue to actually be a little bit, regressive and racist and sexist as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Sev Kumar from Union City. I have a question. Basically, many of my office colleagues and supervisor, they are upper caste and vegetarian people. During our lunch hours or other casual setups, they often openly talk about pride of they being vegetarians and directly or indirectly mocking meat eaters. One time they even advised me not to wear the cloth displaying a black movie hero character, and they asked me to go along with the popular belief on whiteism. I found this very offensive. I try to ignore them, but sometimes I want to counter them right away, explaining what they are doing is offensive. but I cannot counter them because I fear of my job security because I am on H1B temporary visa. I'm not a citizen or a permanent resident. I also, because these people are closely knitted with other supervisor in the company, so I also don't want to go to HR fearing the prejudice and then retaliation on my professional life. So I need the speaker's honest opinion on how to encounter these people, but at the same time not affecting my professional life or job security. Thank you very much.
Give you a sort of a magic bullet, sort of a solution here. I'm not entirely sure of the, when you say that your colleagues are mostly vegetarian and especially your line managers are vegetarian, I don't know, if anyone's there supportive to you, or what is the structure of the company, what can you go to HR, I don't know. But without knowing all this, my intuitive response is, because I've been in this similar positions. So my intuitive response is that I normally, it is easier said than done, but I kind of, over a period of time, I developed this idea, this tactic, which is not to feel antagonized, but just put the states across. Just state certain facts that's going to really pierce them, that's going to really test them. When people ask me, for example, when people ask me about vegetarianism or that sort of thing, I will simply say this, but we know that is not true, because we know for a fact in India, this is what's happened. So give an alternative, concrete statement instead of getting into an argument. That is what I've done in the past, where the power relationship is a little bit more maneuver, if you can maneuver it, then you can get into some sort of a heated argument. But given what you just described, I would say, put the facts out and let them speak for themselves. And under your strategy about, kind of countering their microaggression by wearing t-shirt, it's not a bad idea. But I think these people, one thing I've noticed, these people, even though they are bullies, aggressors, they can't handle facts. They will find it very unnerving. They find it extremely unsettling. And after a point, you can choose, the other tactic that I always used, I never actually immediately react, but I find a moment to come back, to do my comebacks. So these are my own little tactics, strategies that I used to adopt when I felt a bit, intimidated and bullied. I'm not quite sure how far this will work, but stay strong. That's all I can say. Sorry if I'm not more help. But yeah.
Actually, a central question. It's not standing in any corner, and I think the way you articulated it is itself something for all of us to learn from. That is, you're articulating a tension. While you're articulating, you're not resolving something. So that tension is between your feeling of humiliation, if I might use that word. And Sam Gundimeda, in the context of beef festivals in India, wrote a very important paper. You can look it up, otherwise I'll send it to you. And he said that once one reaches a point where you can't deal with that humiliation anymore, then you start asserting with pride and positivity what is your preference or your even cultural tradition of food, and that time will arrive without any intimation to you, right? But in the meanwhile, you are not wrong, number one, to think about job security. You don't want to completely give up everything right now. Not giving up on putting forward the facts is an important thing that Murali is talking about. And there are countless facts about who eats what in India that destroy every myth. For example, only somewhere between 20 to 30% of India is vegetarian. right? And these things are also correlated to the fear people feel. Increasingly, there's a culture of fear in reporting that they eat meat. And you can have a number of articles that actually reference through data. So just keeping some of these things, books and data points, even on your desk in full view of others is not a bad thing. It actually makes sure you don't let go of them very easily. A few other ways I can think of. One is, I'm sure there are hopefully other non-vegetarian Indians and non-Indians in your office. Hopefully you'll get invited to some party there where an American will nicely serve roast beef or whatever else. And you ought to be able to partake in that food in front of the vegetarian line managers that you have without pissing them off, right? But at some point, you should prepare yourself for the fight that you'll have to do. And I even want to twist it another way. There is a person by the name of Selva Gomadi from Madurai, who was the person who filed the public interest litigation in Madurai against the beef ban. And in that, she said that she's a vegetarian. And she just felt that it was a person's right to eat what they choose to eat. So she comes from an individual rights point of view. And it was quite interesting to see that she was a vegetarian who was fighting for the right to eat beef. And to quote Gopal Guru, a very important scholar of caste, he also talks about how equations are made very easily between meat eating and politics that don't really hold. So if you are a vegetarian, that doesn't mean that you have regressive politics. And if you eat beef with gusto, that doesn't mean you have progressive politics. Gopal Guru is telling us. So we need to also work on loosening these equations made between food eating and politics. In your case, of course, it's a different thing. These are clearly Brahminical practices sought to be imposed in hopefully discriminatory ways that we will be able to show that impact on workplace productivity. Your workplace is being turned into a hostile workplace because of this. I think it is time for you to, if you haven't already, keep notes, keep as copious notes as possible, log down everything that is said. You never know when it will come of use. And also, if you're not already doing it, which I doubt, I think you are already doing it, talk to more people who will empathize, appreciate, and give you the confidence, and everyone needs it. You need to be heard, listened to, and thought of as someone, fighting a good fight. And there are people who will support you on that. But ultimate decision, unfortunately, will be yours, because you'll have to pick and choose the battles. What is a battle worth choosing? But a time will come when you would say, so much and no more. I'm going to do something, right? And at that time, there will be people supporting you. But thank you very much.
Can I take 1 minute if you don't mind? Can I take 1 minute?
Yes.
So I was an atheist right from my childhood. Guess where I ended up? I'm a gastroenterologist. I ended up in a Catholic hospital. And if anybody knows that I'm an atheist, I will not get any referral. And there are other people, so-called higher caste, those guys, if they know I'm a periarist, I will not get any patient. So I had to survive. So on a practical level, your choice is keep your professional levels separate and the personal life separate. I didn't have to go and tell everybody I was an atheist, I was a periarist, but I did a good job. So I got my patients, I took care of it.
Lakshmi, can I take 30 seconds?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is for the future, for us to build some campaign collectively. I am also a core member of India Civil Watch International, and for a long while we've been wanting to do a campaign that shows the hypocrisy of some of these arguments. So for example, cricket ball, mridangam and tabla. If we take these commodities and we follow it right through the production to the consumption of these things, leather is a huge part of it. So if you are going to be so moralistic about beef eating and extend that to moralizing about vegetarian, then I think you can have a case to slowly ask his bosses, hey, you know, this is a good thing, you're not eating beef. I presume you must not be listening to Carnatic music because mridangam is really, you know, it's leather, and I am sure you don't watch cricket, right? Or something like that. One has to build some kind of a way to bring these things together. And I take Meena Danda's point very clearly too about the production side of these things. So it should be possible for us to think of interesting, creative, slightly mischievous, but definitely a very witty campaign to bring out some of these issues. We have to retain a sense of humor when we are, especially amongst humorless bigots.
A couple of thoughts. I'm not sure that if that's African-American colleagues in his office and you know, other progressive white colleagues. So it might, one thing that one can explore is that, you know, allyship, to, you know, build your allyship with people who are like-minded, like, you know, who are like-minded. And I just like to reiterate one point just purely based on experience, that the reason why we also sometimes get a bit unsettled and unnerved, that there is this internal submission to that supremacist attitude as well. So we should genuinely feel they are not dominant to us. You know, we should genuinely believe that, you know, what these guys are doing, unfair, unjust, and illegal, unlawful, and inhuman. Therefore, we have the moral courage, we have the ethical standpoint, we have the morally speaking, we are superior in many ways. And that's something that we have to constantly keep telling ourselves. We are better than them. You know, that's something you know, very important. Otherwise, at the end of the day, it's like in an abusive relationship that we submit to power. Therefore, the oppressor can actually we allow the oppressor to dominate us. Once they know that our core belief, you know, our core self is actually strong, they will know, they will realize. Once they realize that, you know, this guy is quite strong, you can't actually, you know, then they will simply move away from you. So that requires certain external, you know, like markers, like what Balmurli said. You can you know, display certain things, but also, you know, you know, familiarize yourself with the you know, counter arguments by talking to like-minded people, you know, from AKC and others, so that you become much more confident in terms of you know, counter-articulating their you know, baseless bigotry, if you know what I mean. So I think that's my like after thinking.
They are surviving just with the baseless fugitives all the time. Now time for Biju's question.
Thank you, Kanakalakshmi, and I don't think my question deserves that special spot of trying to be the one that ends, because I'm a little worried that it's a little esoteric, or at least some people may see it as a little esoteric. But before I go to my question, very, very quickly, all that lovely and, you know, such solidarity that many of us were able to express in terms of suggestions. I just want to say one last thing on that, which is, when we as an individual, each of us as an individual, find ourselves unable to act, we have to find that the solution is to act through an organization. Organization is the protection against the incapacity of an individual to act because of their immediate surroundings and powerlessness within an immediate surrounding. So, for instance, if in the context of the Cisco situation, if AKSC were to write to all the big techs, right, for instance, and that becomes a point of discussion, then you're only discussing company policy and letter that has come to company, right? So we have to find new ways of acting, and organization always is the most solid flanks you can find when we find ourselves disempowered as individuals. So I cannot emphasize that more. Now to my question, which is to Murali Shanmugavelan, which is, so big data and algorithms. In as much as this whole domain of big data based, machine learning based algorithms fundamentally announces the end of theory. That is, we don't articulate anything in terms of a theory, but everything is produced out of data. That is, what is reality gets reproduced as rules for how we must exist. In that sense, what we are finding, I work in a taxi, Uber, Ola, Lyft union structure. What we are finding, especially in the US, is that the big data, the algorithms, decision-making algorithms that even Uber uses, there's a lot of race already coded into it. So, in other words, I'm saying this question may sound a little esoteric because we are dealing with real practices of caste and race discrimination every day. And now I'm talking about something that is hidden in an algorithmic decision. But I want to insist that maybe we should not take it as esoteric, but really once these decisions get hidden behind algorithms, the notion of practice that Murali you were talking about, right, gets hidden behind algorithms. And so what, I mean, we have to fight a very different kind of a battle. And I think organizationally, many of us need to take leadership in that kind of a fight. What are your thoughts about that, Murali? Thank you.
Thank you, Biju. Murali, you were talking in the mute.
I've unmuted myself. Thank you, Biju. Thanks for that interesting question. I think this is one of the emerging areas that we should be catching up with. I completely agree that when it comes to racial bias in the algorithm and in big data, it's already been proven, partly because the US, what we call, I'm sure which you know, labeling data, annotating data, and indexing data. It's been, you know, when they do that, they subconsciously profile them in racial terms as well. So no, they are able to base what they are able to now reveal the extent of bias now. When it comes to caste, though, that sort of a labeling and annotation and the indexing has not yet happened. To tell that in a very non-tech language, we have lots of caste-based conversation happening on the internet, but in order to track that down, we do not have enough proxies or mechanisms to do that. Whereas for race, it has already come to exist because people are more aware of it. So one of the things that some of us are trying to do now, how do we develop proxies to detect caste biases on the internet? That's one thing. And the second thing is that there are obvious indicators, such as you probably know, very recently, what is this matrimonial website? The name escapes my mind. There's a matrimonial
Shadi.com.
Shadi.com. Shadi.com, admitted that they had unconsciously introduced caste filter when seeking brides or grooms. So that's so we can see this is already happening. So what my view is on this is that if we actually begin to consolidate some work in this direction, we will find the internet is inherently casteist, and that's partly because the last point is the people who currently annotate these Indian side of content, they are normally associated with dominant caste outsourcing BPO owners. And the idea of understanding of what constitutes, let's say, a caste slur, what constitutes a caste discrimination, what constitutes a caste-based, casteist expressions might be completely different from a Dalit point of view. So therefore, there needs to be a whole lot of conversation that needs to happen, and some tech corporations, have just woken up. For example, Google Research now set up their own operations in Bangalore, and then they are coming up with a strategy. One of the strategy they are coming up with, which was part of, they were talking about how do we understand the existing caste biases and discrimination on the internet. But much closer to home, the other thing is that Aadhaar card as such has its own, I'm still unclear how much of the Aadhaar card, there is a scope for profiling one's caste. You can do it. Can we do it indirectly by looking at the community benefits, by looking at their public distribution benefits? Is it possible at all? Because what started out as a very innocent project now seems to have grown. The tentacle seems to have grown. So that's another area that we are getting lots of very worrisome reports how Dalits and Adivasis are actually being punished going to this other scheme. So there is again some work needs to be done. So these are emerging areas, and people, this is one of the areas that I'm actually fascinated about it. So yes, it is happening. We can say the internet is casteist, but more work needs to be done to demonstrate and then prevent this in the future. So we have to catch up with that in that particular direction.
Thanks, Murali. There is a case, GDPR case coming up next week, which attempts to gain control over individuals' inference data. So just watch out for it.
Thank you, Biju. Actually, I really want to thank everyone staying this late, even after we crossed like 30 minutes over the time. So thank you for both Murali's. Easy to say that way than mixing up with Balmurli and Murali. So thank you for everyone. And please keep watching our website for other series and other, be part of all this active participation in Cisco case and also the discrimination case, because as both the speakers mentioned, and the AKC also believes, this is the time that we need to act on and get serious about this discrimination. This is a golden opportunity we don't want to miss. Thank you, everyone, and see you guys again July 23rd with another fantastic topic. Thank you, Balmurli and Murali.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.